this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 155 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, popularly known, at least in this room, as the mighty OGGO. Before we start, as always, everyone, please keep your headphones away from your microphones so we can protect the hearing of our very valued interpreters. We'll head to our witnesses. We'll do 1 hour with the witnesses, and we're going to go in camera and hopefully finish the Canada Post report. Mr. Mills, welcome back to OGGO. I understand you have an opening statement for us. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, merci d'avoir invité.
Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting the department and its Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance to come speak with you about this important study for Indigenous procurement. I am accompanied by Catherine Poulenc, Assistant Deputy Minister, Departmental Oversight Branch, and David Noss, Director General, Departmental Oversight Branch. First, I want to remind us all that we are here on the Algonquin and Anishinaabe territorial unceded lands, and they have been living here for time immemorial, and we are pleased to be able to be here today.
This procurement strategy for Indigenous business program has been an important Indigenous business development tool for many years. It focuses on encouraging the participation of Indigenous businesses in federal procurement through mandatory, voluntary, and conditional set-asides. More recently, the Government of Canada has established the target of a 5% of total value of federal contracts awarded to Indigenous businesses to direct its purchasing power in support of Indigenous businesses. PSBC is working with Indigenous Services Canada, as well as Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, to support departments and agencies to meet the minimum target of 5%. As a department, PSBC is also working to ensure that 5% of our purchases are directed towards Indigenous businesses. Last year, we did not meet this target. In part, this is because a large part of our contracts are awarded for large value, complex endeavors where it is simply not possible to find Indigenous primes. Instead, our large contracts are making a difference by ensuring subcontracting and employment opportunity benefits to Indigenous businesses and individuals, which aren't always reflected in the numbers. The inclusion of participation plans and contracts is driving these economic benefits through subcontracting. We continue to look at ways to increase Indigenous prime contracts. We have introduced Indigenous by default approaches, where Indigenous participation must be considered in all procurements. And PSBC has introduced limited bidding in certain cases to allow procurement to be accessible solely to Indigenous businesses. Mr. Chair, we share this committee's concern regarding the potential deliberate misrepresentation of indigeneity on the part of government suppliers. Indigenous Services Canada is a lead department for the Government of Canada's procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses. ISC is also responsible for defining the criteria for eligible Indigenous businesses, administering the verification processes of a business ability to meet the eligibility requirements, and maintaining the government's Indigenous Business Directory. As with other departments, PSBC relies on the Indigenous Business Directory to assure that we are contracting with verified Indigenous businesses. I will note that Indigenous Service Canada is currently working with their partners to develop a path forward for transferring the verification process to Indigenous groups. Mr. Chair, the government has taken two important steps to safeguard the integrity of the federal procurement system and to take action to protect Canada from suppliers of concern. First, it has created the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance, or OSIC, to enhance PSBC's capacity to identify and respond to instances of supplier misconduct and wrongdoing. Second, it introduced the new ineligibility and suspension policy to provide OSIC with a range of actions, including suspension and debarment, on a much broader scope of misconduct. To be clear, these changes enable the Registrar of Ineligibility and Suspension to suspend and debar suppliers based on an assessment that shows they have violated the integrity of the procurement process, even in situations where there are no criminal charges or convictions. We encourage departments and agencies to come forward with their concerns about potential wrongdoing and misconduct. Even if departments do not report issues, OSIC can self-initiate assessments if they become aware of issues. With regards to Indigenous procurement, I can tell you that PSBC is actively engaging Indigenous Services Canada to ensure that deliberate misrepresentation or false claims of indigeneity are referred to OSIC for consideration. Since its inception earlier this year, OSIC has already taken action against a number of bad actors and continues to step up the government's efforts to root out suppliers of concern. In closing, Mr. Chair, the Government of Canada buys some $37 billion worth of goods and services each year. Directing 5% of these purchases to Indigenous businesses can have a significant positive impact on Indigenous business development. PSPC will continue to use the government's buying power to help address the inequities that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous businesses. At the same time, we are equally committed to safeguarding the integrity of Canada's federal procurement system. Merci.
Thank you.
Mr. Generous, we'll start with you for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're just seeing some news that Randy Boissonneau's company, GHI, has been suspended from eligibility for government contracts. Could you clarify if that's correct and whether or not GHI, Randy Boissonneau's company, is currently eligible for contracts?
Thank you for the question. So I can confirm that as the Registrar of Ineligibility and Suspension, I provisionally suspended GHI from doing business with the Government of Canada. The suspension came into effect November 22nd, 2024, and will be in place for 90 days, but can be extended if necessary.
Okay, thank you. Could you clarify just the specific reasons why you took that step?
So before answering that, it's important to mention that we're constantly looking at various type of information while assessing the risk that a supplier may pose to the federal government. So we have gone through multiple sources of information, including lawsuits, both civil and criminal, and the information that has been brought to our attention recently concerning an Edmonton Police Service investigation kind of put us at the right level of threshold to take action under the policy.
Thank you. So we obviously don't think, in the Conservative Party, we don't think that GHI should be getting government contracts. But it sounds from your answer like Indigenous identity fraud was not a contributing factor to your decision to suspend them. Could you clarify whether a clear case of Indigenous identity fraud, false claims about being an Indigenous-owned company, was a contributing factor to your decision to suspend them?
I can confirm that the GHI has never been a member or never been on the Indigenous Business Directory. They have not received or participated in set-asides for Indigenous processes, so it was not a factor from a contracting perspective.
Well, okay, they made false claims in the process of making bids. That's what's been reported on. So you're saying they weren't on the Indigenous business list, but they nonetheless claimed to be an Indigenous business because they thought it would provide some advantage for them in the context of making those bids. That's still identity fraud, whether they were successful or not in getting that particular contract, and whether or not they were on that list. They still clearly misrepresented themselves. So, do you think that GHI committed Indigenous identity fraud, regardless of the outcome? Do you think they committed that fraud, and was that a factor in the decision to suspend?
Thank you for the question. So it's important to mention that as the Registrar of Ineligibility and Suspension, I am not a law enforcement agency, and I do not have to confirm whatever behavior is criminal or not. But to answer your question, the representation has been part of the cases that we have looked at and will form one of the factors that will be looked at by the determination team while finalizing the assessment of GHI.
Okay, it sounds like you're saying yes. It sounds like you're saying yes, that the fact that part of your calculation in terms of the provisional suspension and the ongoing review you're undertaking, one of the factors was reports about misrepresentation of Indigenous identity, which you're clarifying. It's not you're not necessarily saying it was criminal, but that you're saying was misrepresentation. It sounds like you're saying yes. Are you saying yes?
I'm saying that it's part of the assessment, but the important point that you made at the end, that I'm not commenting on the criminal aspect of it, or it's a very important point to take into consideration.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. So GHI, a company that is owned by a current Liberal MP, former cabinet minister, has now been suspended from eligibility for government contracts provisionally. Of course, we would advocate a stronger position of them not being eligible for government contracts, period. And I note that that initial suspension did follow us calling for that. And I think there's work that continues to be done to get to the bottom of what happened with Randy Boissonneau and this company, and we'll certainly continue to follow that work and do that work. For our information, I would like to request that you provide this committee with all of the bids that have been made by GHI, so we can see what claims were made in those bids. Is that something you're able to provide us with?
Thank you so much. I can partially answer your question, and that it will follow by document. So the integrity verification services are aware of two bids, one that came in 2020 and the other one that came in 2023. We are in the process of gathering paper copy of those bids, and while we have gathered them, it will be our pleasure to transmit that information to the committee.
Okay, thank you. So we'll look forward to that information as soon as it's available. On Indigenous identity fraud in general, you said in the opening that some action has been taken against bad actors. Could you name the bad actors and identify the action that's been taken against bad actors in relation specifically to Indigenous identity fraud? And if we run out of time, I'd like that list in writing.
Mr. Chair, I apologize if I made misconstrued or conflated taking action with bad actors under the OSIC as opposed to implying that we're taking action specifically against an Indigenous business. We have not taken action to my knowledge.
Well, sorry, we're not really talking about Indigenous business. We're talking about those who pretend to be Indigenous businesses. So maybe could you clarify, has any action ever been taken against a business in response to Indigenous identity fraud as part of the procurement process?
Thank you for the question.
Short answer, please.
OSIC has no role or responsibility in determining which supplier belongs to IBD or not, or whether that supplier made a false representation. In order to take some action, we absolutely need to have a referral from a lead operation agency. In that case, will be ISC.
Right, but I'm just wondering, has any action been taken against any company? Because if they provide you with the referral, say there's a problem, then you follow up on that, is my understanding. So are there any cases in which you've been able to identify Indigenous identity fraud happened here and there's been a consequence?
Sorry, we have not been referred any cases from Indigenous Services Canada of misrepresentation that we can, but that said, as I said in my opening statement, we have reached out to Indigenous Services Canada and asked them that if they are aware of anything, to please refer them, and we would be happy to look at them.
Yeah, that's concerning and good to know. So thank you for the information.
Thanks very much. Mr. Sousa, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for attending today. Just to clarify, is the minister an owner of this company that they're mentioning, this GHI?
Thank you for the question. So it's my understanding that actually the company is solely owned by an individual that is not the minister.
Right. So the minister is not an owner of the company.
No.
Can you also clarify the qualifications, the criteria by which you have to be an Indigenous on that list?
Thank you for the question. However, I'm not the person that is better placed to answer that question. As it was previously mentioned, who should go on the IBD list is really a responsibility of ISC. They are looking at those criteria to put them on the list or remove them from the list.
And was this company on the list?
I can confirm that this company, to my knowledge, has never been on the IBD list.
So Mr. Bosno did not own the company. It was not on the list. Did they ever get awarded as an Indigenous company? Awarded contracts for being Indigenous?
To my knowledge, there was only one contract that was awarded to that company back in January 2024. The contracting authority confirmed that it was not from a Indigenous business set-aside contract. And they also confirmed that no dollar have been spent under that contract.
And you're taking the precautions and the necessary steps to ensure that the company operates effectively or not, and we have reasons that we wish to review it effectively, and that's why it's been suspended. Is that correct?
It's correct.
Can you identify or briefly explain the differences between the new Office of the Supplier of Integrity and Compliance and the previous integrity regime? Can you explain what's the difference here?
Okay, thank you so much. So OSIC has mainly two functions. One of them is to administer the ineligibility and suspension policy. As the deputy mentioned in his opening remarks, that policy give us much more authority to act. And the main point in that regard is that we can now act even if there are no charges nor conviction against a company. Prior to June 2024, we could only act if a company was criminally charged charged or convicted of a specific offense list under the policy. Now we have much more room in order to assess various sets of behavior and establish if we want to put mitigation measures in place, including suspension, debarment, and or enter into an administrative agreement with the supplier. We also, as I previously mentioned, maybe in other committee, the ability, a much more broader ability to detect through our data analytics tool cases of wrongdoing and or overbilling.
For the benefit of the committee, when was OSIC implemented and when was the integrity of regime first introduced?
So I may turn to David to complement my answer, but I would say that it's important to know that we have an integrity regime in place since 2015. So we have administered that regime throughout that time, and we identify places where improvement were needed. That's why we have created the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance, announced by the Minister in March, and just recently implemented in June 2024 to give us more tool and to improve our reactive measures into some cases.
So the government has been proactive in identifying and providing integrity in the process of procurement. We have been modernizing, we have been taking the necessary steps to ensure any bad actors and others. Can you tell us, the committee, how many contracts exist? How many contracts do we do in government?
Thank you for the question. I will turn to the deputy.
I believe it's on the order of about 400,000 contracts a year. Majority of those are very low dollar value, but certainly we would be doing thousands of contracts that would be of significant value.
And so the Office of the Integrity and the process, there's a pre-evaluation and at times a post-evaluation. Is that correct to some of these contracts?
For the Indigenous procurement?
Indigenous and other contracts generally, because this company that they're referring to never was an Indigenous, never became an Indigenous contractor.
I would answer in terms of the Indigenous Business Directory. There are pre-audits and there are post-audits of contracts done under the procurement strategy for Indigenous business. For more large and significant procurements, they often have a two-stage procurement process. The first one with the qualification stage, and in that case, we would look at a number of factors with respect to the company, their capacity, their past experience, and in often cases, their financial stabilities and ownership.
Any idea how many are being reviewed now? Out of curiosity, out of the 10,000 contracts, how many contracts a year? 400,000?
400,000. I would say that you're probably in the range of several hundred contracts which are large that would have that two-stage process.
Right.
And then in terms of the numbers of businesses being reviewed by Indigenous Services Canada, you'd have to discuss with them.
And what role does the department, there's obviously various functions by which procurement oversees other ministries. Explain the interrelationships there.
Just a short answer, please.
So just to be clear, the policy framework for procurement resides with the Treasury Board Secretariat. PSBC, as a common service provider, prepares a number of practices, template contracts, and whatnot that we share and share it to support other departments to use for their procurements.
Thank you. Please.
Sir, Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mills, Ms. Poulin, Mr. No, thank you for being with us this morning. We already talked about it a little bit in May 2024. The Office of Integrity, the previous integrity system, was replaced by the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance. For the past 5 years that I've been here, I've often seen departments throw each other various issues, like hot potatoes. Actually, it's a third party. It's not us. It's that department. It's not. It's actually a third party that is in charge of making sure that the policies and the legislation is enforced, but nobody's talking to each other and nobody is accountable. Is it the same thing here? So here, the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance could say such and such a department awarded a contract, but, that department didn't check that it was an Indigenous business, but they awarded the contract anyway. In that kind of case, would it be the department that would be held accountable? Is there something to force departments to respect the policies? Thank you very much for the question. I think it will be very important to distinguish between the different roles that I have as part of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance. The first point is that my role as registrar is chiefly to establish whether a supplier poses a risk to federal purchasing and to make sure there are measures in place in case they are a risk. So my role has an impact on all departments that would wish to conclude agreements with those suppliers. So I'm provided with information on a supplier. I check whether there should be measures put in place. After that, we inform the departments. So it has an impact on all those departments. I have a second role also that is very important because I'm also responsible for investigations within the department. As with any other department, there is such a role in any department. It's very important to distinguish between those two roles because I don't have the same authority or impact in those two roles. Now, in the case where you find information that you provide to departments and that the departments disregard that information that you provide, I mean, that's a hypothetical situation, but it could happen. Would the department be imposed sanctions or other measures to have refused to take into consideration information you provided? Currently, the under sanctions would be with the suppliers. This morning, again, I had a discussion with an Indigenous business that talked to me about the businesses that decide to form an alliance with an Indigenous business. The Indigenous businesses are happy to be able to be the sole provider, but then realize that the shell company is just a company and that they have no recourse. So despite their cooperation, the Indigenous business will get almost nothing, just crumbs. Or the contract will be improved and there will be 20 more jobs available under that contract, but the Indigenous business sees none of that. What happens in that kind of situation? What can you do to make sure that non-Indigenous businesses that are the ones signing economic agreements, financial agreements with Indigenous businesses are constrained and they have to make sure that they are not shell companies and that they boost up the Indigenous business also? How can you do that?
There's the kind of controlling factors that Indigenous Services Canada looks at are ownership, control, as well as the value of activity. So within the framework under the procurement strategy for Indigenous business, they would be looking at those joint ventures and ensuring that there's ownership and control, but also that 33% of the value. They have the power to do post audits to assure that the 33% is done. If the 33% of the value is not going to the Indigenous business, the contract can be terminated.
Si je peux ajouter,
If I may add, of course, if a different department or agency has evidence that there was wrongdoing, they can refer the case to the RCMP or contact our new office. And in those cases, we can also see what kind of mitigation measure we can put in place to better deter, to really deter future wrongdoers. Thank you. I'll keep my next questions for my next turns.
Thanks, Mrs. Vignola. Ms. Blaney, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank the folks that are here to testify for us today. I do have some particular questions. We know that a lot of Indigenous businesses are really struggling around Section 89 of the Indian Act. That portion really creates a lot of economic inequalities. And I'm just wondering, in the role that you play in working with ISK, is there feedback loops for Indigenous businesses to let you know what's working, what's not working, and identifying some of the key legislation federally that has an impact on their business and their capacity to create bigger wealth? What I've heard again and again from Indigenous leadership is that they're frustrated with incremental change. It's just a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And I've also heard for bigger projects, because they can't have the bonded portion for their business, they may have the capacity to do bigger projects, but they can't access those bigger projects. And so I guess what I'm really curious about is, if this commitment is something that's serious of all departments, what is the dialogue and discussion happening to sort of address these issues that are really implemented from a different federal department through the Indian Act, but having huge economic impacts on Indigenous communities?
I would say that there's a number of channels that we have direct conversation with Indigenous businesses. We have Procurement Assistance Canada, which does a lot of outreach to small businesses and is trying to understand what their challenges are within the procurement processes, what kind of supports and aids they can. On the bonding piece, very well aware of the challenges with bonding, Section 89. In fact, we are about to launch some new measures on bonding to actually look at raising the size of projects that would require bonding so that we can create more space for unbonded transactions, which will open up space for Indigenous businesses. And then we're also looking at kind of more, I would say, targeted projects that would have an opportunity for Indigenous participation, and looking at whether or not we need to have bonding on an optionality basis. Another channel I would say is that we have quite a longstanding relationship with NACA, the National Association of Corporations, and they often will bring to us kind of what they're hearing in the marketplace and what kind of challenges they're seeing in the procurement space. And as well as working with Indigenous Services and the National Indigenous Economic Development Board. That's another venue for us to understand kind of what are some of the Indigenous business and economic development challenges and how they may interface with procurement, and figure out how we might be able to improve it. The last thing I would say is that we are working constantly on things such as Indigenous participation plans, and in the live procurement processes, we will have discussions with Indigenous communities to see if the way we're approaching Indigenous participation plans actually works and is effective and is driving those benefits.
So thank you for that. That was a helpful response. I guess the next component of the question that I have around that is, if I understood correctly, it sounds like you're exploring areas like, for example, if an Indigenous community has a business that's relevant for that local area, and if there's opportunities that come up through the different federal departments, is there any discussion about how to make that work more effectively so that there can be that better turnaround time, and again, less focus on those small contracts, but expanding to some of those big contracts? We know, like I said earlier, that some Indigenous businesses have talked about watching other businesses come into their own community sometimes, or their own region, and they could have done that work, but because of the Section 89, they are not eligible to do that work. So I'm just wondering, is there actual discussions at that process level about looking at regions and identifying where Indigenous businesses have capacity and making that work more flexibly?
Absolutely. We look at it from, let's say, three lenses. The first one is we do have a lot of information on the Indigenous business community generally from Statistics Canada and others. So we're all looking at where the business capacity is from a sectoral perspective, and try to say, like, how can we target procurement strategies in certain sectors where we know there's Indigenous capacity. We definitely look at it from a geographical, looking at, particularly, I'll give the example of the North, Nunavut. We have very specific targets for how do we get Inuit businesses into procurement in Nunavut. And the third is for all of our large projects, we always start from a place when I said we have kind of Indigenous by default. The start is what is the Indigenous aspect for this procurement? Can it be a prime? If not a prime, how do we maximize opportunity for Indigenous businesses? And so we absolutely, on the big procurements, look at it from a lens of how do we have some Indigenous element.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess my last question. I know that identity has come up quite a lot in the last while, and we know that when people claim false identity, who it really punishes is Indigenous people trying to get into the field. I'm just wondering, you were very clear that ISK is the one that helps guide you in that. I'm wondering what that discussion looks like in terms of figuring out how to do that better, especially now that there's such a public pressure on it. I would imagine that those discussions are more fluid right now. So if you could share what that process looks like.
I'll be quite quickly. The conversation is very focused on what could be the role of Indigenous communities in terms of identification. I think we've heard loud and clear from Indigenous leaders that they want to be able to validate that people that are claiming membership in their communities are valid members of their communities, and that those businesses are indeed Indigenous businesses according to their principles.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Genius.
Thanks, Chair. Just a comment off the top. It's pretty incredible to me that Liberals are still trying to defend Randy Boissonneau, and we saw that with Mr. Sousa's comments. Just to be clear about the facts, GHI was owned by Randy Boissonneau. It appears that he dumped his shares, yes, at the last minute. He dumped them in June of this year. But he owned and directed this company while sitting in the federal cabinet and while pretending to be Indigenous. So Mr. Sousa pointing out that the Liberal ex-minister dumped his shares at the last minute, I don't think is much of a defense. This company was owned by the ex-minister who falsely claimed to be Indigenous-owned, and false claims about his Indigenous identity were made by the Liberal Party itself. This is why it's an important issue, and all of the events around the bids on these contracts happened while he owned the company and while he was still sitting around the federal cabinet table. Follow-up question to the officials on the issue of Indigenous identity fraud. So AFN has said that a majority of the beneficiary of these programs are shell companies. This is testimony that's been backed up by others. Many concerns, as you've heard, raised by Indigenous leaders about rampant abuse, in particular Indigenous identity fraud and various structures that seek to present non-Indigenous companies as Indigenous through abusive joint ventures and other things. Meanwhile, you're telling us that the government department, Indigenous Services, that's responsible for overseeing this framework, has failed to refer even one single case of Indigenous identity fraud to you. There seems to be a massive disconnect then between what Indigenous leaders are saying on the one hand about rampant abuse and the failure of the government department responsible for this to refer a single case of Indigenous identity fraud. How do you explain this discrepancy?
I've been in contact with my colleagues and counterparts at Indigenous Service Canada. They have followed up with the AFN. They've invited the AFN to provide specific names. We have not, to my knowledge, received the specific names, but if the AFN were to furnish the names of the companies that they're concerned with, we will absolutely look at them and do an assessment.
Okay, but I'll just say on that, you've got significant concerns from many different Indigenous leaders. It's not their job to police the specific enforcement of the program. They're seeing a problem in general, and you would expect that government departments would be able to assess these bids, identify the problems, and when you don't have a single case identified by the government, it suggests that there's just a lack of interest, a lack of capacity, whatever it is, to actually enforce the basic parameters of this program. I guess I'd say, isn't it your job to, well, maybe not yours as particular individuals, but isn't it the government's responsibility to enforce this program and not Indigenous leaders who are outside of government?
Again, my understanding is that Indigenous Services Canada periodically is doing verification of the businesses on the Indigenous Business Directory, and that some businesses will be removed over time because they'll have changes in business status or whatnot. In their work and verification, they have yet to refer one to us on the pure basis of misrepresentation.
Yeah, I guess it just seems to me though, maybe you guys should offer a contract to some of the folks at the Globe and Mail, because they are turning up all kinds of information about abuses in this program. Others, global news, many have exposed critical information around abuses of this program. The government can't identify a single instance of Indigenous identity fraud, it seems, and yet media and Indigenous leaders are bringing all of these cases forward. I just don't understand where the disconnect is.
Well, there is one area which is very technical, is to my understanding, some of the businesses that Global News and First Nation University and others have identified as saying that they don't have indigeneity, or their respect to businesses that are part of a Indigenous organization that may not be recognized by those bodies, but is recognized by the Government of Canada.
Okay, yeah. So yes, you have an instance where you have communities that are not considered Indigenous communities by mainstream Indigenous organizations that the Government of Canada does. So that's another issue. But like, how do you explain the fact that there's not a single case? Has the position of the government, like, are you listening to it? Is the government listening to what Indigenous leaders are saying?
Brief answer.
Again, Indigenous Services Canada is doing verifications, and perhaps the explanation is that the veracity of this misrepresentation isn't there.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, welcome back.
And thank you so much for your testimony here today. We've heard from Indigenous witnesses representing organizations and businesses across Canada how important the PSIB, the procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses, is. And you highlighted that fact. The Government of Canada enters into 400,000 contracts or purchases or transactions, $37 billion. 5% of that set aside for Indigenous businesses could make a huge difference, and is making a huge difference for Indigenous communities and businesses across Canada. But our conversation is about strengthening this program, and it's about strengthening the integrity regime as well too. The previous integrity framework, the Harper government's integrity framework, had significant weaknesses in it. I'd like for you to speak about the fact that under the old Harper integrity framework, a company like GHI would still be allowed to operate. There wouldn't be any avenues to suspend their contracts with the federal government. Can you speak about the weaknesses of the old Harper integrity framework, and talk about the improvements that have been introduced by this new Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance? What are the differences?
Thank you so much for the question. I will just start, and we'll turn to David in order for him to explain. So, as I mentioned previously, I think the main improvement that we have seen with the launch of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance is to have moved from a system that was only oriented to criminal charges and conviction, so moving from there to a system that is much more broader in the way it considers ethics business, and that offers very much more triggers in order for us to act. But David, if you can.
Building on Catherine's initial response there, we have built on the initial regime based upon our departmental experience to date. Some of it has been adding additional triggers, so adding new offenses. Previously, it was largely based on economic offenses or anti-competitive behavior. We've expanded that scope to include some other criminal code offenses to work that aspect into it to broaden sort of the net that's being cast with regards to suppliers. We also are looking at further flexibility with regards to those suppliers that raise our attention. So if you are debarred by another jurisdiction, we would like to have a conversation with that supplier with regards to that misconduct which triggered that debarment and elsewhere. If you have a civil judgment against you with regards to an offense that would be similar to one of our listed offenses in Canada. That is also a triggering event. In addition, we've also expanded the scope of what we classify as business ethics. We're including consideration of offenses tied to human trafficking or forced labor, environmental violations, the labor code, things of that nature, just to become a little bit more of that corporate social responsibility aspect behind the government's approach to debarment and suspension. In addition, we're also looking at integrating greater flexibility with regards to how we respond to misconduct. So we have this flexibility to cast a broader net, but we also have additional flexibility on how best to respond in a manner which is more commensurate with the risk that the supplier poses to the procurement system. Previously, it was a 10-year debarment. That was it as a reaction. This now, it's a little bit more. We can get up to 10 years, but it's much more of a consideration of the criteria and factors associated with the specific circumstances of that supplier.
Are there any incidences that you can point to that led you to make the conclusion that we need to change the integrity regime, the framework, and we need to augment it with these new set of rules, these new set of triggers? Are there incidences that you can point to?
There are a number of instances, particularly that jump to mind with regards to one aspect of it is provincial equivalence. Under the previous regime, we did not look at provincial equivalence to one of our listed offenses. So there are tax offenses at the federal level as well as the provincial level. So if someone ran afoul of a provincial tax authority and received a conviction, that wasn't recognized under the previous integrity regime. It is now under the changes that we've just adopted.
That's great. How much time?
That's great. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to come back a bit to what we were saying earlier. For an Indigenous business that after signing a contract with a non-Indigenous business, that it is being set aside, an Indigenous business that notices that, does it have a way during the duration of the contract to raise a red flag, to say, hey, wait, this business is not respecting the contract, which means that I'm being used like a shell company and that's unacceptable. Is there a way during a contract for a business to flag something like that so that there can immediately be action taken? Thank you for this question. What I would say is that during the contract itself, there's a technical authority and contracting authority, and the technical authority supervises the delivery of the goods or services. So first it would be the client that has signed that contract for goods or services. A second aspect to consider is to contact Indigenous Services Canada to clarify the measures related to the joint venture statute and status. If that person knows that criminal activity is occurring or that it looks like there's criminal activity, they can definitely refer that case to the RCMP. And the last point I would raise is that we are working very hard in concert with the Competition Bureau and the RCMP for fraud decline. Any person in procurement who thinks there may be issues with the contract or a supplier can call a line, an anonymous line, to tip authorities off. Of course, people can tell us who they are also. We look at that information, and sometimes it will be combined with other information to give us more information to investigate.
Ms. Blaney, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. And the question that I would like a little bit of clarity on is I understand that there hasn't been any charges that you're aware of businesses using false identity to get contracts. and get resources for that. That is concerning to me. I do share that concern. And it sounds also to me like the only pathway forward is to simply remove a business from the list. And I would say that I would hope that there was a higher level of accountability. Just removing a business from the list is a very passive action. It doesn't really address the fact that there has been an element of fraud and that people are claiming Indigenous identity when the community does not see that as belonging to them. So I'm just wondering, is there any actions beyond simply removing the business from the list? And is there any discussions around looking at that and making sure there's a level of accountability that is higher?
Again, as I stated in my opening remarks, we're really concerned about protecting the integrity of the procurement system. So if a business is being removed because they were misrepresenting themselves, we would like that to come to our attention. And Catherine, I'll turn to Catherine, who can talk about some of the tools she may have if there's a case of misrepresentation.
Thank you so much. So what I can offer to complement the answer is that, again, and I mentioned it previously, the authority that we got are very recent. So it's not intuitive for people to think of us because our past authorities were based on criminal charges and conviction. So we are super pleased about those new authorities. We are implementing them. I have reached out to all counterparts within the federal government to explain that those new authorities and what role we can play in deterring such behavior. So as the deputy mentioned, if the reason to remove somebody from the list is linked to fraudulent behaviors, we can play a role, and we are ready to play that role. However, we are counting on the lead operational agency or authority in that domain to refer the case to us in order for us to assess if it meets the criteria under the ineligibility and suspension policy, and maybe action more broader response to those type of conducts, if I can say.
Thank you
And
very
I'm
much.
just wondering, oh,
Yeah,
that's the
that is
time.
our
Thank
time.
you.
Unless you have a very quick question, they can get back to us in writing.
No, it's fine, Chair.
Thanks. We'll go to Mrs. Block, and then we'll finish with Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be splitting my time with my colleague, Ms. Kusi. So thank you as well to the witnesses for joining us. You are a fairly new office, given your creation in May of this year. And I would just simply note that it was, in fact, the Deputy Minister for PSPC, Ariane Reza, who stated on June 3rd that the committee, that the creation of OSIC will help the department respond more effectively to cases of supplier misconduct and unethical behavior. I guess what I'm hearing today is that the work that you will be doing is very reliant on whether or not departments refer these cases to your office. Is that correct?
Thank you so much. It's important to mention that we can do two things. So we can self-assess some cases based on other source of information, and it's what we did in the case of GHI because it came through other means than an authoritative or an authority within a department. And for internal misconduct within the government or within the operation of the department, of course, we will rely on their knowledge of their program to refer the case. But this doesn't preclude us from self-assessing based on other source of information.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Mills, in your opening statement, you stated that because PSPC gives out such large contracts, the department can really only look to get Indigenous businesses involved as subcontractors. However, we have learned over the last couple of years, as we've been studying everything that's been going on in procurement, that departments don't track subcontractors. How is it that how is it that you can say that PSPC is focused on getting Indigenous businesses involved as subcontractors when you aren't even tracking subcontractors?
What I can say is that for the very large transactions, many of those will require Treasury Board authorities. And so I will see the Treasury Board submissions, or the procurement results will sometimes require Deputy Minister approval. So I will see that the contracts that are being awarded do have Indigenous participation plans. They have target levels. So I know that the activity are being identified at those contracts. We haven't been systematically capturing that value. So that's what we're focused on as a department this year, is to make sure that we're systematically capturing where we have those Indigenous participation plans, or what the level of involvement is. I do agree it's been a big gap up until now, but I have seen these contracts going through. And I just want to clarify that there are some cases where Indigenous companies are the prime. So I know in the Arctic warning system, there's actually an Inuit company that is the prime. So it's just generally, in most cases, our large projects like the center block rehabilitation, there's no construction company in the Indigenous space that could carry that out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, as I'm sure you're well aware, there are many issues which our Canadians are seized with at this time. Obviously, the privilege motion in the House of Commons, where the government is refusing to hand over the documents regarding the Green Slush Fund. As a result of the good work of this committee, we saw the resolution of the Minister of Employment, where he finally recognized what he was doing was wrong, because his Prime Minister would not take responsibility for removing him. And he finally resigned. And I really believe a lot of that has to do with the good work of this committee. But the other issue, Mr. Chair, that this committee, as well as Canadians, are seized with is the issue of the $9 million residence in New York. We have had Mr. Clark here twice now to testify. We have found that he has not been truthful with this committee. Comments that he has referred to as comments in passing definitely appear to be more than that. We have had colleagues on this committee say comments in passing include things like, the weather today is gloomy. We are getting close to the holidays, but the comments that Mr. Clark made are significantly more in depth, show much more of his involvement in choosing this $9 million residence. And I believe that there is a yearning from both Canadians and this committee to know more from those who were there, Mr. Chair. And with that, I'm moving the following motion: that the committee call Mario Bott, the Director of Management at the Consulate General of Canada in New York, as well as the three other individuals in the room when Mr. Clark made comments in passing about the residents, as he stated in testimony November 21st, and that one additional meeting be held on this study to accommodate these witnesses. Again, Mr. Chair, he says they are comments in passing. It is evident that we need more information.
I'm going to interrupt you for 2 seconds.
Certainly. Thank you,
It
Mr.
has
Chair.
gone out already a few
Okay.
days ago, but the clerk is just sending it out again.
Thank you very much. It's evident that we need to get to the bottom of these comments in passing. Were they comments in passing, such as, once again, we will soon be in the month of December? Very simple comments in passing, or is there something more significant which indicates, as we have suspected, as we have determined, that Mr. Clark had a more significant role in convincing his good friend, the Prime Minister, to purchase him this $9 million residence? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. I'll start, Mr. Souza. Just before you continue, I'm starting a speaking list. Remember, I will announce the current speaker and whoever else is next on the list. So pay attention. Go ahead, Mr. Souza.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's been a number of meetings. I think we have over 7 meetings already on this issue. You're making reference to an individual who's now retired and is a private citizen. Also making reference to individuals that are mid to low level who have no decision-making issues here. Tom Clark appeared before us. He wrote a letter. He was under oath. He stated his position very clearly. And in the end, what we found and what we've noticed is that the decisions were made by a very extensive process. And the comments that may have been made were certainly not relevant to the decision, because those comments were similar to those made by previous conservative individuals at the head of mission in that very same city. So I think this is a moot point, and I wouldn't proceed further, given that we have such important business to attend to, more relevant as we go forward. And I get this is being used as a film studio, but the member opposite for media clips, but we have some important business, Mr. Chair, and I think we should just turn this down.
Oh, no one else? Are we ready to go to a vote? Madame?
Ms. Gainey. Mr. Baines.
Against.
Mr. Jawari.
Against.
Mr. Kuzmierchuk.
Nope.
Mr. Souza.
No.
Ms. Block.
Yes.
Mr. Generous.
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Madame Vignola.
No.
Ms. Blaney.
No.
3 yeas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nays.
Thanks. It is defeated. We'll go to Mr. Baines for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our department officials for joining us today. Madame Poulin, you mentioned the new authority, something that's changed from previous governments. I just wanted to clarify, is it because of this? Like, has this led to more findings of misconduct just because you have some more investigative powers in some manner, or you talked about authorities? Can you maybe just talk about findings? Are you finding having more resources or tools to find these things out?
Thank you for the question. So I will divide the answer into the authority and the resource that we get. So in terms of authorities, a provisional suspension like the one we just did, it's certainly an authority that we are welcoming and that is very, very useful in order to mitigate the risk, more aligned with the timing of the action. As I mentioned, before that, we had to wait for criminal charges or convictions, so our time of reaction was too long into that. So this is something that we very appreciate. And of course, with the launch of the Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance, there were resources that were given to us. So we receive around 6 million to hire more people. And this is divided in multiple teams. So more investigators, more people within the determination teams. We have created a little team of restitution. And yes, we have seen an increase in our response to or wrongdoing or in our ability to respond and recover funds from some of that wrongdoing.
So resulting in more transparency, essentially.
Yes.
We had on October 17th, we had PSPC officials appear as witnesses, and we talked about essential and distinct roles of ISC playing in the Indigenous procurement. I just wanted to reconfirm some aspects of that testimony. It is the Indigenous Service Canada's responsibility to develop the definitions for Indigenous business and rules for the IDB and PSIB. That's correct?
This is my understanding.
Okay, and then fraud prevention in regards to the Indigenous Business Directory, procurement strategy for Indigenous business is the responsibility of the ISC, also correct?
Also correct.
Okay, and then, in November of 2024, the Minister of Indigenous Services told the committee that the Office Supplier Integrity and Compliance can consider any instances of perceived fraud and misconduct related to procurement strategy for Indigenous business. So how is it possible for OSIC to consider any instances of fraud if ISC is responsible for establishing the rules, definitions, and performing compliance audits?
Thank you for the question. So it's important to distinguish the lead authority, the lead department authority, in that case ISC, that is responsible to determine which supplier belong to the IBD or whether a business has made false claim of indigeneity they know their business, they know their criteria, they can come to such conclusion. Once they have reached that conclusion, it's true that they can refer those cases to us and that we will assess their finding to see if we can have a broader response to that type of misconduct by maybe contemplating suspension or debarment of such supplier.
Okay, so that broader ability is an added verification and an added measure, added layer to the work that's being done.
Exactly.
Okay. I thought somebody said how would your office address an allegation that a supplier falsely declared themselves to be Indigenous for the purpose of gaining access to the programs, encouraging Indigenous procurement, if ISC is responsible for defining and verifying who qualifies as Indigenous for this program? So a little bit different question.
Yes, similar answer, however, in the sense that OSIC has no role into that. So we cannot play that role. We have no authority in order to determine if a supplier belongs into the IBD.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Witnesses, thanks for being with us again. Before you go, I just have a quick question. You mentioned there was one contract bid by GHI for January of 2024. Would you provide us with the RFP and all details of that? I realize no money's been paid out, but can you give us the details of the RFP in writing and give us a copy of that, but also give us a copy of the bid that they put in?
Thank you. We will look into. We
you
will provide. We will provide. We will gather the information and we will provide.
Thank you very much. We're suspending.